Hi, this is Joan Conover. This is Seven Seas Cruising Association, and I've just opened and we're letting the participants come in. They're streaming in. We are also streaming live to YouTube, so there will be live participants on that side as well. Give it another couple minutes as people are still coming in. Well, very good. This is Seven Seas Cruising Association. This is a presentation on communications, where topics are better internet access, house and boat access, how you do that, cell internet Wi-Fi routers, antennas, nearshore communications, and offshore. Our sponsor is Nautic Ed, and I want to thank Nautic Ed for allowing us to do this. SSCA members get 2 trial courses. What we will cover: home, boat, and security, nearshore cell, Wi-Fi, and routers, really communications for snowbirds, offshore and communication and Caribbean cell communications. We will have a Q and answer chat. And then we have our speakers, Don Romard, who's doing the home and boat security, the nearshore cell Wi-Fi routers, that is Louis Soltero, offshore and Caribbean cell communication, that's Bill Woodroffe, and Scott Berg. And then we have a Q&A and chat with Scott. The idea for Q&A, if you have questions, you will see on the Zoom screen, you have a Q&A box. You can click and ask your questions. There's also a chat. We will answer that at the end of this presentation. At the end of the presentation, this is recorded, but afterwards we'll be sending out Louis Soltero's slides, because there's a lot of information in there, and a really nice video the Working Cruiser sent to us by Cecilia Dahl. Again, our speakers, Don, he's new to cruising, but he's good on security, and he's waving his hand there. There's Louis, who's right there waving his hand. There's Bill. Bill is down in Antigua. And then Scott Berg, hello, Scott, is here as well. Again, the Q&A plus chat, see the bottom of the webinar screen, and chat will be answered during the talk or after the agenda. Island PC may be able to come in or not. I haven't been able to reach them, so I think probably not. And at this point, I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to invite Don to unmute himself and start his slides.
All right, can you hear me, Joan?
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, good evening, fellow sailors and friends. I'm thrilled to be here and to be the opening act for some serious powerhouse speakers after me. I'm going to talk about internet security, not as much physical security, so a little clarity there. My wife, Lorraine, and I, as Joan mentioned, we joined the Seven Seas Cruising Association in January, so we're new to the club, but we've been sailing for many, many years. But as we started to decide to cruise for longer amounts of time and longer distance, we said, let's join an organization where there's people that we can gain knowledge from. People have been there before, done this before. And I have to tell you already, we've gained significant benefits by being members of the organization. So tonight, I'm going to share a little bit about my search for better internet access for our house. And at the same time, I was looking to set up things for the boat. So those two dovetailed together. It was an interesting journey. And these slides will also be available afterwards if anybody would like to take a look at them. My wife is my co-captain. We sail a 2007 Jeanneau 36i. We've been sailing together for over 20 years and married for almost 18 of them. Now, prior to retiring, I was in the information technology field. I started my career out as a computer programmer a few decades ago. And I ended up my career being a senior architect and a technical fellow at Northrop Grumman Corporation. And that was a really prestigious position. I was really flattered to have that. I was one of 200 people out of a corporation that had over 80,000 employees. I also hold 2 master's level certifications. One's in enterprise architecture and the other one's from MIT in essentially model-based systems engineering. And as I started on this journey with my routers and modems and internet access, decades-old experience from doing hands-on networking helped me out. I had to brush off the cobwebs, but it was very helpful. So do you worry about being hacked? Having your identity stolen? I sure do. I've had security software on my laptops for decades. But probably only about 6 months ago, I actually put it on our cell phones. And it's really something you should do. I know 2 close family members who've had their identities stolen. And most times the credit cards and banks, especially credit card companies, will take care of that for you. They're in the business of making money. They'd rather have you as a customer and absorb those losses. But as we got closer to retirement, we said, we're not working anymore to bring income in. We're drawing from our savings. We want to protect that. So if you're using online banking software from home, on board, on your laptop, or on your cell phone, there's a risk there. If you're jumping on somebody else's Wi-Fi and you're not using a virtual private network software to protect and basically encrypt your communications, your user ID and password is going out there. So somebody could grab that. My personal email address with an old password is out there for sale on the dark web. So this is real stuff. We see this stuff in the news all the time. So I was looking for a better security system in my internet access, as well as some other things. So let's talk about Verizon. You remember that commercial? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? The guy would walk and keep checking. Well, it's a hell of a lot better nowadays, but it's still not perfect. We're all looking for bars when we're going somewhere. What is your signal strength? Do you have connectivity? We find in general that while we're cruising, unless we're somewhere really, really remote, when we're anchored on a mooring, we can normally get a cell phone signal. We've even gotten cell phone signals, 5, 10, 15 miles offshore. We're in sight of land, so line of sight, it works. Now, that's what we did for many years. We just had our cell phones. We upgraded to smartphones so we can get the weather radar maps and stuff, so we knew if it was safe to travel or not that day, or it was a day to hunker down. But again, as we start cruising longer distances for longer periods of time, that might not be enough. Now, your mileage may vary. So what are your needs? Now, that's cell phone signals. Now, as it turns out, in our house, we don't get a good cell phone signal. But the new cell phones are smart enough that they'll jump on the Wi-Fi signal. So that's how I get most of my communications at home on my cell phone. It's actually through my internet service. On the boat, I'm finding more and more cell signals are much, much more accessible. Now, having said that, Wi-Fi, which used to be really spotty, that's getting better too. But I think you'll see as the trends are going, the carriers are spending a lot of money on infrastructure for cell phone signals and speed, and all these things are pointing towards our smartphones or other ways to get to the internet. So what about Wi-Fi? Do you have a good Wi-Fi signal at home? I worked from home for about 15 years. And the funny thing is, the cable company gave me a router and a modem set it up, and it worked like magic most of the time until it didn't. Then I had to place a service call. And I really just took that part of the technology for granted. It worked most of the time, and it was good enough. Well, then we started cutting the cord. We wanted to get rid of our cable provider for TV. So we bought a Roku device for one of the TVs in our workout room. And that worked fine because that was in the basement of our ranch. That's where the router is. That's where our home office is. Everything worked fine. But then we buy a Roku for our living room TV, which is at the other end upstairs in the ranch. That didn't work so fine. I'm having buffering delays and loading delays. So I start doing a little bit of research. You know what the most common problem with buffering is when you see that little circle spinning? You're not getting a good Wi-Fi signal. Turns out this magic doesn't go through every single wall and floor in your house. The simplest solution is to centrally locate the router in your house. And I did that. and I walked around the house and tested the signal. And you know what? Just doing that helped a lot. Now, in the end, I bought a better router, and I'm going to talk about that and why. So back in January, a fellow architect friend mails me this article on router security. Now, being retired, I had the time to read this gentleman's articles. It's Michael Horowitz, and he provides some really great content on how to set up your routers for internet security. I must have spent 4 hours reading through his stuff. Being retired, I could. And having worked with this stuff in the past, I could understand it. But it is technically deep. He then goes into a whole security checklist, and he admits that if you do this whole checklist of his, you probably need to be a spy agency to have to do all this stuff. But if you don't understand any of this stuff and you want to get an idea what the risk is, watch the movie Snowden. And if that doesn't scare you, all those stories about being hacked and stuff does. But then Michael goes into a recommendation for this PepWave Surf Soho router. And he gets nothing from this company. He just picked this router because it was a business class router with good security. So I read that article and I started doing research on it. Now, in the process, I had to do a lot of research on routers, modems, our internet service provider. And at one point in time, Lorraine says, "You have already researched this to death." I said, "Wait, honey, this is really complicated stuff. And if I'm going to spend a lot of money on this stuff, it's all got to play well together. Otherwise, we're wasting money." So she let me keep going. But one of the things I found out is that cable modem that we got from our cable provider, that we're paying $10 a month rent to them, it suffered from this chip flaw in the Intel chip. That last link on the bottom of the screen there talks about it. There's a class action lawsuit going on because this chip is in tons of these modems. It causes buffering delays. It causes slow loading of web pages. Well, thank you not, internet service provider. I got rid of that modem, but I did have to research, and you would too. Call your cable provider, whoever's providing you internet, make sure whatever you're buying is compatible. And once you've checked all that, then you can feel safe about setting it all up. Now, I've since spent many hours configuring the router, thankfully going through Michael's step-by-step procedures. And I've got it mostly set up, and it's been working for a week or two now. There's more I want to do to put more firewall rules in place, but it's up and it's operational. Now, this topic is really deep technical stuff. If you don't understand TCP/IP addressing, what's a network mask, what is DHCP and DNS and firewall rules, find someone to help you with this stuff. Now, these routers are not super expensive, but they do provide far better security than what you're going to get commercially. And that's why I wanted to invest the money in, because I cared about somebody hacking my identity and ultimately stealing my money. Now, I talked a little bit about firewall rules. One of the things Michael talks about is blocking things. And he talked about, here's the IP address to block anybody from Russia. I don't know about you, but I don't have any friends in Russia. Maybe some other bad actor states we could put in there. But he also talks about, do you want to block all those things you have in your house that are the automatic thermostats or Alexas or whatever? Those things are all phoning home and sending data back to the parent company. But you can block all that stuff if you care about your privacy. It all depends on how comfortable you are or not with that occurring. So I started doing the research to the Surf Soho that Mike recommends. Again, it's a business class router. Interesting, it'll work off of DC or AC. It's designed that it could go in a fleet truck or in a business branch office. It has a USB as a WAN port, so you can plug in your smartphone as a hotspot, which isn't recommended to do that long term. Certainly for short periods of time, you can do that. You really want to buy a dedicated hotspot if you're going to do that a lot of the time. It's got an interesting feature called Wi-Fi as WAN. What that means, if this router is close enough to a marina, IV, RV park, or you can even take it with you to a hotel, you pick up that Wi-Fi, it rebroadcasts it, but provides a security buffer between your devices and that external network. Well, I don't need that capability at home. I'm not in a commercial neighborhood picking up somebody else's Wi-Fi. I have my own Wi-Fi. But that might be useful on the boat. So if I'm in a marina that's providing free Wi-Fi, my hope is that this will work for me. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, one of the cons for this device is it only works at 120 megabits per second. Now, Michael talks about in his articles, he's talking all about router security. If you're interested in speed, go look somewhere else, he says. Now, what do you pay for matters too. We currently pay for 200 megabits a second. Now, you might be able to reduce what you pay for. 100 megabits might be enough for you. So maybe this router would work for you. In our case, I said, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I want to upgrade a bit. The next step up was a little bit faster, but it didn't do Wi-Fi. Again, these things are designed to work in businesses where maybe they don't need Wi-Fi. They're just going to hardwire right way up to it. So then Michael provides a link to this PepLink Balance 20X router. And it was very intriguing because it's not marketed towards mobile users. Again, it's a business class router, but it has dual WAN. So that means it's got one capability to talk through your cable modem to your internet service provider. And it's also got a built-in LTE or cell phone modem to, at the same time, connect to two sources for internet access. In the business world, they use that for failover. That if you're in a branch office, something like that, and the cable provider dies, you will seamlessly fail over. So Michael says, well, that might be interesting. What if you have a vacation home and you go there for 3 or 4 months, you turn on your cable provider and you use that service when you're there, but then you're going to leave. So you shut that down. Well, this router has that modem in it. It's a cell modem. If you buy a SIM card and a very small data plan, it could be sending you alerts about things going on in the house, power outages, and you could put water sensors in and things like that to see what's going on in your house. So I said, we don't own a vacation house, but we have a vacation home that moves called our sailboat. And when we do that, we're leaving our primary residence empty. Now we'll have somebody looking after the house while we're gone, might have some family using it, but I said, that might be useful for the house. Now, in the process, this also pointed me to the Mobile Internet Resource Center. You see a picture of Christian Cherie there. I've had a bunch of emails back and forth with them and shared some of this content with their permission here tonight. Tons and tons of free resources helped me enormously. I ended up signing up for their service to get even more. So then I do a deep dive into this Balance 20X router. Again, business class, again, DC power, with an AC adapter, again, USB WAN, that LTE modem I talked about. It's got an expansion slot. You want to add a 5G cell modem in the future, you can do that. This thing works at 900 megabits per second. It has Wi-Fi. It doesn't have that Wi-Fi WAN capability, but it does support VLANs, which are virtual local area networks. So now you can segregate your networks. I can have a home network just for us that's private, another one that's set up for guests. So they come in, they have access to the internet, but if there's some kind of malware on their phones, they're not going to infect our devices. You can set up networks for the kids that turn off at midnight, depending on your various needs. Again, we pay for 200 megabits a second. This thing is much faster than that, but it's designed to handle up to 60 users. So all of that puts loads on a device. So we're not going to stress it in any way. So I feel that this is going to give us room to grow. Oh, and it came with a GPS antenna, but I'm not moving it around, so I didn't need that. So here's what I ended up doing. I purchased that router for $400. Talked about all the capabilities, and here's a summation of it as well. So my total investment was $500 for a new modem and that router. In the process, we dropped our voice over IP phones that we had in our house for years. That saved us $50 a month. Another $10 a month for the cable modem that had a floor in. I think it will recoup our costs in 9 months. Then I'm going to purchase the Surf Soho for $200. Not a lot of money, but I wanted a flexible solution on our boat that used the router as a hub. Looking at a hotspot device, I'm going to be listening to other people tonight to see what they recommend and doing some other research. But I'm also probably going to buy a cellular antenna. That's going to be ballpark another $600 investment that will hopefully give us good internet access when we're on the boat. So here's what that might look like. Got a router as our central hub. Again, I mentioned for years, we just used our cell phones. You might just buy a hotspot device. It depends where you want to start and how you want to grow your solution. The advantage of a router is it becomes a central hub that takes away the complexities of where it's getting the internet access from your laptops and cell phones. You just always connect to the router. Now, I showed 2 hotspot devices, but that's because you might be traveling. And if you're moving in different areas, you might need different cell phone coverage. But the router can really only support 1 at a time. Now, I mentioned Wi-Fi. If it's free from the marina, take it. Why use your cell minutes? So initially, we're not going to buy 2 hotspot devices or a Wi-Fi antenna. I'm hoping the Wi-Fi capability in the router is good enough when we're close enough to the marina. And we're hoping that this year we're going to go up the coast of Maine to the border of Canada. And as the border opens, we're going to go into Nova Scotia. So we're hoping that our Verizon phones and the hotspot will be enough to serve our needs. If not, in the future, we might get a different hotspot device. So we feel for just a little bit of investment, this should be a pretty good flexible solution for us. So in summary, we're much better set up for internet security at home and soon on the boat as well. We have much better Wi-Fi signal strength and speed at home. And because the boat is a smaller area, there will be no problem in that department. So we're hoping, again, that picture I just showed you and talked about, we should have a pretty good setup for the boat, at least for this summer anyway. We'll see what brings the future. Thank you very much.
Don, thank you very much. And do you want to drop your share? And this is going to work perfectly with Louis' presentation next. Louis Soltero is very well known in communications. I think we've known, I'm not sure how long we've known Louis, but we've worked with him for years. Scott knows him for years. Bill knows him. And he's going to talk about Wi-Fi, all the things that you wanted to know. And Louis, turning it over to you.
Okay, so let's see, I'm sharing now. Let's see, I'm just gonna try to, I've lost my cursor. Just stand by a second, please. Okay, stand by. I'm trying to find my cursor. It's disappeared. Just a second, please. Having some technical difficulties here, unfortunately.
You will find it.
My
It's here somewhere.
It's disappeared. Okay, here we go. Found it. All right, so here we go. All right, and then, all right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Can everyone see me?
Yes.
All right, so my name is Louis Soltero. I've been a member of SSCA since 1992. Been cruising for almost 30 years. I now own a powerboat. I know that most of you guys are sailors. I do have a mast on my boat, so I hope that counts for something. But I am a communications guy, and over the years have basically established a company which we sold in 2017, specializing in offshore and nearshore communications. So this presentation is on cell phone boosters and Wi-Fi boosters. It's quite technical. There's probably several hours worth of material here, so I'm just going to skim over this very quickly. I'm hoping that this presentation will be shared with you so that you can use it as a resource. My boat email address is at the bottom there. You might want to send me an email and ask me questions. If I don't get overwhelmed with questions and I have time, I will respond to them. And so let's dive in. One of the issues that we have on our boats is that we want to use our mobile devices, and the FCC has decided that because these guys transmit microwaves and we use them near our heads, the power that they use to actually transmit is very, very low. So when you're communicating with that cell phone tower or you're communicating with that Wi-Fi device that's on shore, the problem is usually that those devices, those towers can't hear you because the signal that you're broadcasting is in the milliwatt range and very low power. So what we want to do when we're out in our boats is we want to amplify those signals. We want to amplify the signals coming in. We want to amplify the signals going out so that we can extend the range and improve the speed at which we're communicating. And so we'll focus on that. I'm going to first talk about the cell phone boosters. I'm going to first talk about the Wi-Fi boosters very quickly, but then I'm going to focus mostly on the cell phone boosters because I believe that's where the technology is going, and it's certainly what I have been using 99% of the time in my cruising over the last few years. So first of all, on the Wi-Fi boosters, there's a million of them in the market. they're all pretty much very similar. They come in two flavors. They will allow you to connect to a shore station at 2.4 or 5 gigahertz. And they're going to amplify your Wi-Fi signal coming in and going out of your boat. Now, I've got a bunch of text here. I'm just going to skip over this and let you read this offline, and I'll just basically focus and go over those points with this wonderful drawing that I've made. Now, I will say that the original of this will be for sale for auction after the talk, and it'll go to the highest bidder. So this is SV Awesome Internet. And the way these cell phone boosters works is as follows. Basically, you have an external antenna. And then that external antenna is connected to a little Wi-Fi router hotspot down below. You Wi-Fi connect between your device and the hotspot that is in your boat. And then that signal is then retransmitted out the extender or the Wi-Fi extension or amplification system that you've got installed outside. Now, a couple things here. Most of the extenders all work about the same because the FCC regulates the maximum power that you can transmit to be about 4 watts of effective power. So they're all rated about that. And so the range you're going to get is typically maybe 1 mile, a couple of miles. So when you're out on a mooring or so forth, this will work fairly well for you. When you install these things, you should really install them only about 10 to 15 feet above the water line. And the reason for this is because these high gain antennas have very flat radiation patterns, much like your radar. And so if you install them on the top of your mast, which is going to be your inclination, is you'll overshoot the antennas that are installed in the marinas, which are typically just right above your head. As you walk down your dock, you'll see the Wi-Fi antennas that are mounted just, 10, 15 feet above the dock. They're mounted low so that they're close to your boat. And if you mount your antenna at the top of your mast, then you'll just overshoot all of that and it will not work well. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you're using these in the marina, you will overwhelm the marina Wi-Fi receivers and you will kill the performance for all of the boats around you. And so if you can connect your device to your marina Wi-Fi without using the amplifier, that's what you should do. The process of connecting to the internet is quite tedious. First, you Wi-Fi connect to your router, then you go to a web browser and you scan for available hotspots. You then instruct the amplifier to connect to one of those. You enter the password, which you must know. And then if all goes well, at that point, you're connected to the internet and you can browse and do your internet traffic. So it's short range. Every time you move your boat, you need to do this process, which is quite tedious. And of course, most Wi-Fi on shore are secure. And so you need to know the password in order to be able to connect to those devices. So not a technology that I particularly care for. I like the cell phone boosters a lot better, mostly because the range is much further. The connectivity is seamless. You basically just use your device and you don't have to worry about any mechanics of connecting to a remote device or remote station when you use them. In the US market, there's really 2 vendors that basically excel at this. One of them is WeBoost. The other one is SureCall. I put the Shakespeare Halo on here. The Shakespeare Halo is nothing more than a SureCall that has just been rebranded. I had a WeBoost several years ago. It worked fine. I haven't used one in probably 5 years. I use a Fusion to Go. It works extremely well. And so we'll go through the mechanics of using both of these boosters is pretty much the same. So again, I'm going to skip over this text and just dive in here. Now, the boosters work a lot different than the Wi-Fi amplification systems. The way they work is you have a high gain LTE antenna outside. You have low loss coax cable going to an active amplifier, which is inside your boat somewhere. And then that amplifier retransmits via an internal antenna the Wi-Fi signal that is received from outside. And any Wi-Fi signals that are received from within your boat are amplified and transmitted out. So it's a transparent thing. You're not connecting to a router and scanning and so forth. Any cell phone signals that are outside will be retransmitted inside. Any cell phone signals that are inside will be transmitted outside. Now, there are several repercussions for this. One, you want that outside antenna to be as high off the water as you possibly can. Whereas with the Wi-Fi amplification system, you only have a few miles to transmit. And everybody knows that 10 feet above the water is about 8 miles to the horizon. So again, you can keep those low, it's not a big issue. But with these amplifiers, you can get tens of miles offshore. As a matter of fact, I've got a recorded session from a friend that texts me a message from the middle of the Gulf of Maine, 54 nautical miles offshore. He's on a Crelock 40 with a 65-foot mast. So, I mean, these things can really give you the distance. So you want that antenna as high off the water as you possibly can get it so that you can get over that horizon to that cell phone tower. The other reason you want to have that antenna high above the water is that you're amplifying signals, and the amplified signals from the antenna below the decks can feed back into the antenna outside and create a feedback loop. When that happens, the amplifier shuts down the gain or turns down the gain to prevent the feedback loop, in which case then you get less amplification and you get worse performance. So the best performance is going to be attained by having the antennas as far apart as possible. On my boat, I've got them at 18 feet. That seems to be working pretty well, although in the middle of the Gulf of Maine, I was only able to do 32 nautical miles and not 54 nautical miles. So I'd say 15 is probably about as minimum. There is a null under the outside, the external antenna, under the antenna, because again, these are like radars. They have very flat radiation patterns. And so especially if you put the inside antenna under the outside antenna, because there's a null point there. So, so this is kind of the deal. So you install these things, you can then connect, you can then move in close to the antenna down below, and your phones will magically work a lot better than they did before. Now, typically I recommend using a low gain antenna down below, and we'll look at some of these here. The reason we want to use a low gain antenna down below, again, is to prevent crosstalk. This is really important, especially if you have small separation between the two antennas, in which case then you want to use a very small, very poor performing antenna down below so that you don't get the crosstalk. If you have a Crelock 40 with a 65-foot mast, then you can use a much higher gain antenna, which is going to give you much better range down below because you'll be able to actually cover your entire boat. On my boat, I only can get amplification within about 5 feet from the amplifier, which for my purposes is fine, and I'll show you why. So this is a setup that I have on in my pilot house. You'll notice at the very top of the screen, there's a little black wafer, which basically is the indoor antenna. Below that, there's a gray box, which is the sure call amplification antenna, showing that I'm actually not auto gaining and I'm getting full amplification off of the system. Right below that is a cell phone running a plan from Visible, which I will share with you shortly, which is an unlimited data plan for an amazingly low price. It only allows one device to be tethered to it. And so I have a little Wi-Fi hotspot router, which is a little white box on the front here, which is tethered to that, which then rebroadcasts a Wi-Fi signal that allows my 2 computers, my 2 phones, and my tablet to be connected to the internet all at the same time. So that's kind of my setup. If you have, like I say, a sailboat with a large mast, you can use a much higher gain antenna, and then you don't have to have all of this stuff packed together near the antenna down below. Couple of things, the amplifiers, there's two cell phone conventions worldwide. One of them is the European one and one of the American ones. The 2 cell phone boosters that I just mentioned here basically only work in the Americas. So if you go to Europe or Asia or whatever, you'll need to buy a different amplifier to deal with the frequencies that they use in that part of the world. Most phones will work anywhere in the world, and a lot of the hotspots will, but that's something to keep in mind when you buy your hotspot, your LTE device or your modem. make sure that it works in the region that you're going to be cruising in. So a couple things here. The antenna, so there's my boat on the left. On the right top, you'll see my high gain antenna. In this case, it was a Shakespeare, which I have then swapped out for a pointing, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But you'll notice that I've got about 18 inches of separation between my VHF antenna and my cell phone antenna. The two frequencies are quite different. VHF is about 150 megahertz. The cell phone antennas are transmitting between 700 megahertz and 2.6 gigahertz, so totally different range. But that antenna presents an opaque region for the VHF antenna. So if you put the two antennas close together on the top of your mast, your VHF will stop working because it can't see through the LTE antenna. And so I just use a piece of aluminum plate to separate my two antennas, and you'll need to do the same. On the left-hand side, down on the bottom, that's an in-building antenna. Please don't, a building amplifier, please don't buy those. The in-building amplifiers are sexy because they have more amplification than the mobile ones, but they require you to set the gain manually, which means that every time you move, you're going to have to be dialing in those buttons. The FCC forbids using them in mobile devices. And really, because the amplification is greater, that means the signal from the below the deck antenna is greater, which increases the crosstalk, which means that you're going to need to decrease the gain anyway. And so it's just really not worth messing with the in-building amplifiers. The antenna in the middle is a pointing antenna. It's a fantastic antenna. It's an 8 dBi antenna, much better than the one from Shakespeare. And it's the one that I currently use, and that antenna is fantastic. And it's the one that I recommend. They're available on Amazon for, I don't know, 235 bucks. The small little black antenna there, the little stick antenna, is the high gain antenna for your amplifier. So if you have a tall mast, you might want to be using that down below. And the one on the right is the low gain antenna that I use and recommend people use if they have small separation between their antennas. All right, so I have a few minutes here to go. Wi-Fi routers. One of the things, especially if you have a small gain antenna, is that you need to get close to the antenna to use it. So what we do is we just have an LTE based hotspot. There's many different manufacturers make these, and we sit those in front of the amplification and the amplifier itself within a foot from the amplifier. And then we just use Wi-Fi calling on the boat. We did that in the Bahamas all winter, and that worked really well for us. And it saves us from having to actually walk up next to the antenna in order to use our phones. Again, I'll skip over most of this since I'm running out of time. I did want to go over the plans. We're always shopping for great LTE plans because we want unlimited internet and we want to be untethered. And those plans are really hard to come by. As you know, your AT&T plan or your Verizon plan allows about 10 gigabytes of tethering or so forth, and then they throttle you back. And if you go over the usage, then they might charge you more and so forth. And so here's a few providers that are out there with the different carriers that I have used and work well. The notable mention here is Cricket is owned by AT&T. Oops, sorry about that. Cricket is owned by AT&T. So it's a sure thing. They also have coverage in Canada and Mexico. They're a little more expensive. It's 100 gigabytes for 90 bucks, which is really not bad. So that's a carrier to consider. AT&T works amazingly well all up and down the East Coast. It works great in Maine, Nova Scotia, and we've used it all the way to Cape Breton Island without any issues. Gypsy Wireless and EasyCom have amazing plans, 1.2, 1.5 terabytes of unthrottled internet access for 170 bucks a month, and so forth, and you can shop those. But the one that I've been using recently, because I'm a cruiser and I'm budget conscious, is one from Visible. Visible is a Verizon reseller, and they sell a plan for $25 a month with unlimited voice, unlimited text, unlimited SMS, and unlimited tethering through a phone. Now, they only work on phones, but you can put your phone in tethering mode and you can get unlimited internet on that. They cap it at 5 megabits, But for me, 5 megabits is more than enough. I can do Zoom meetings, I can Skype, I can watch Netflix videos, I can do everything I need to do with 5 megabits. And we've been using it very well for the last 6 months. And it's really easy on your wallet. Now, the thing here, they have some restrictions. One of them is that you can only have one tethered device. And the way we get around that is by using a small router depicted right here. It's a little white box right there. We Wi-Fi connect the router or tether the router to the phone. So it's the one tethered thing. And then it rebroadcasts Wi-Fi so that we can have our 2 computers, our 2 phones, and our iPad all connected to the internet at the same time doing our thing. And so that has worked very well for us. Again, you can go to visible.com and see what the restrictions are or what the plans are. If you want to join and immediately start paying the $25 a month and not the $40 a month that they charge for single plan, you're welcome to use the link that I've got listed there with the following code, in which case then you will be added to my party and you'll be gaining the $25 a month plan right off the bat. Anyway, so that's all I've got for you right now. My time is up. So I will answer questions after our session, and I thank you for your time. And I look forward to speaking to you when.
Luis, can we go back a couple slides? I had one question that needs a slide.
Okay.
Okay, the question on the antennas.
Yes.
You had back one more slide, I think, or maybe it's right there. You have the antenna over as we're looking at it on our screen on the left.
Yes.
The Shakespeare.
Yep.
And then have
and the other one is a pointing, and I talk about the pointing antenna right here. So there it is. It's this. There is a pointing Omni 400 on Amazon. The Shakespeare is a popular antenna. It's got a 4.5 dBi gain in not its flat irradiation pattern, but it's an antenna that is used a lot. And I had one on my boat many years, and it works fine. I like the pointing better because the pointing has much higher gain and much flatter radiation pattern, and it's a much taller antenna. Whereas that Galaxy 5239 is about 8 inches tall. The pointing antenna is about 2 feet tall.
Now, a quick question: will the information on where you can find these be in the slides?
Yes, and yeah. You can buy everything on Amazon. You'll need to make the coax cable. So you'll need to talk to an electronics shop to have a coax cable. Or if you want to, you can go to globalmarinenet.com, which is my old company, and you can buy a kit, which is an amplifier, an antenna, and a cable from them directly. But the antenna is just, the cable is just LMR 400. You have, and then you've got basically to put ends on it, and you can have any shop that does the install for you do that for you.
Well, thank you very much for that. And these slides will be sent out after the event, along with, as I said, the video from Cecilia, who talks about working on the boat and how she managed to stay married working on the boat. And I'm going to turn it over to Bill Woodroffe. Bill and Scott together are probably, well, along with Luis, but using communications in ways and places that most of us are still learning about. Single sideband or cell or Wi-Fi. Bill is sitting in Antigua right now, and he's experienced all the fun and joys of going from one country to another with either finding your cell services or figuring out how things work, and then offshore. And of course, Scott is, okay, he is Mr. SSB. I think he's got about 14 rigs on his boat. He may have more, but I'm going to turn it over to you, Bill.
Okay, thank you very much. You can hear me, I assume?
Yes, just fine.
Okay, good. I do not have slides. I'm not a techie with slides and PowerPoint, so it's going to be a talk through, but just as an introduction to myself, my wife and I are living on board. We've been retired for about 10 years. And before that, we were sailing for 30 years, but locally, day sales, weekend sales, vacation sales, things like that. And over that 30 years, or actually 40 years now, obviously technology's changed. Everything from rotary phones, no home computers, no internet, to with VHFs. The only way you can call somebody was use the VHF marine operator. And so that's sort of my background as far as there. Like I said, not a technical thing, but I do know somewhat about computers, and I can follow what was just presented by Don and Louis, which was very good, by the way. But I'm going to concentrate on the last 10 years because that's where since we're retired, we have a 47-foot vagabond ketch that for the first 2 years after retirement, we sailed down the ICW, down from New York City, down the ICW to Florida, through the ICW and offshore, and also into the Bahamas. That was for 2 years. And then for the next following 8 years up till now, we're in the Eastern Caribbean. That was anywhere from Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, all the way down to Trinidad, and going up and down the islands during the winters, and mostly in Trinidad in the summer, although we did make a couple of trips back to New York at the same time. So that was a basic sailing experience all along. Now, obviously, we want to be in communication as most. We have grandkids, we have friends and family at home, and so we don't have a home in New York, but we do like to keep in touch. And we found out, certainly for the first 2 years, certainly down the ICW, and even living aboard in New York, Chesapeake Bay, and up to Massachusetts, there was really no problem. Technology was changing all the time. Cell phones were becoming more useful. And so that was really no problem. And I think the two presenters really covered a lot of that, and it's still valid for close inshore and in the States, going up and down the ICW and things like that. So that was very good. Well, I did notice when we were there about, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago, cell phone service in North Carolina was very spotty. We happened to be there when Hurricane Sandy was coming up the coast, and our cell phones, and not only ours, but the whole area was kind of shortage of that. So, but I'm sure all that's changed. But you always had radio, you had TV, you have the VHF NOAA weather to get all of that. So coastwise is pretty standard on that stuff. But as I said, technology started moving along. But again, I'll concentrate on here, what we have down here. First thing, I'll just run down what we have actually physically on board our boat right now, as far as communications hardware. Obviously, we have a VHF. VHF is very useful, obviously, and for everywhere. That is a standard. We have an HF radio, a high frequency radio, or marine single sideband, if you want to call it that. Scott Berg, I'm sure we'll discuss more of that, and I won't go into too much of that, what a high frequency radio is. But the actual radio is an ICOM 802, and it's linked to a Pactor 3 modem, and that gives me the possibility and the actuality of sending email over the radio, and that's basically worldwide. I also have a ham license. That means you can not only transmit on the single sideband marine frequencies, but also ham frequencies. And you can use emails and things like that. You're not going to surf the net with a ham radio or a marine single sideband, but you can definitely send emails and get grid files and things like that. Otherwise, we have one laptop, 2 open smartphones with hotspot capability, 2 tablets, and all this is Androids or PC operating systems. We do have a Wi-Fi router, a Rogue Wave, which works very well as an antenna booster with the Microtech router, internal router here. So we use that as when we're on Wi-Fi, we put that on, and we have the Wi-Fi within the boat. And we also have a basic spot device, a Spot X. That's a simple device that sends your position. We use that on the Salty Dog Rally coming down here a couple of times. It keeps sends an email of your position, your actual GPS position, as soon as you press the button, and you can send it to 10 people at a time. It's a one-way communication. There are other things like that for two-way communications too, which we'll talk about in a minute. We do have, I bought a WeBoost WeBoost Wilson cell booster about 4 or 5 years ago and installed it in Trinidad, but it never really worked well. And I got a feeling, and I had a question at the time, I could never figure it out, that as Lewis pointed out, there's two systems in the world, GSM systems. And I got a feeling down here, I'm not too sure what system they have, because that cell booster never really worked for us. It didn't really bother us, and I'll get into that in a minute, but that's one thing. If you do have going offshore, as I said, you have two different systems in the world, which, by the way, I remember when we first came down here too, a lot of the cruises had Verizon phones, and Verizon were giving a hard time connecting to the systems down here too. That may have changed, I don't know, but we've always had AT&T and T-Mobile, so I'll talk about that in a minute. Other hardware stuff here, we have a Cirrus Xm Radio. Okay, it's only receiving, but we get weather, we can hear local television, news shows and everything else, and it is only a one-way thing. But surprisingly, it does work all the way down to Trinidad. Cirrus Xm will never say that, but it does. And as far as this, as I said, but the smartphones, we have two smartphones, and we do have telephone numbers with AT&T and T-Mobile. When we first came down here, well, let's say 8 years ago, 7 years ago, we were using AT&T down, which is very to the Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands. As soon as you go off there, now you have to remember, now you're in different countries. All the cell phone, all the telephone companies in the U.S. say USA, maybe a little add Mexico, maybe a little add Canada too, but everywhere else, now each country has their own companies or lawyers or anything else. So you just can't use an AT&T phone coming down here. It'll work actually, but you'll get hit with roaming charges and slowness and everything else. So what you have to do then is figure out how are you going to use your US phone down here. Well, the first couple of years, what we did was, what you had to do was each island you go to, and each island is a different country, you had to get a local SIM card. So that meant obviously you needed an open cell phone. You needed an open cell phone so you could put in your own SIM cards, which we did. Every time we went to a different island, we go to BVI's, we get a SIM card. We go down to Antigua, we get another SIM card. St. Martin, Guadeloupe, all the way down. And that gets kind of, it's not all that expensive. The SIM card itself is maybe $10 a piece. It's not a big deal. And it depends how long you're going to be in an island. If you're going to be there for a few days, it probably is not worth it. But if you're going to be there for a month, well, maybe you get you pre-buy a monthly plan for data and phone use. And I'll get into a little bit more details of that in a second. But that's how we used to do it, buying a different card each island. Mainly, then you heard about this Google Fi coming along. I said, oh, you could use that worldwide and everything else. Well, at the time, we also had T-Mobile, and they were saying, well, you could use that all the time too, which we did. The only trouble with that is, and this is true of every single US carrier, and each carriers down here too, is that you have to remember those companies are dealing with the laws in the country that they are issued with. So US, T-Mobile, AT&T, Google Fi, whatever it is, they will allow use outside of the United States or Canada maybe, but only for a certain period of time, and maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months. And all of a sudden they'll say, hey, listen, you've been out of the country too long. You'll have to stop using that, or we'll just cut your service off. So that was one of the other reasons why we ended up using local SIM cards down here, and which obviously in the last year, the pandemic has shifted the dynamics a lot, because before that, before the pandemic came, as I said, we were up and down the islands. We'd spend maybe a month in an island, maybe a few weeks to a month in an island, just jump down to the next island, do the same thing, up and down, all the way down to Trinidad and everything else. And so it wasn't too bad. The pandemic obviously stopped that. I mean, you still can do it, but it's much more difficult. And quite honestly, I'd rather not on the pandemic thing. So what happened was last summer, we spent 8 months in St. Lucia and mostly in the marina. And the marina had Wi-Fi. And we ended up using Wi-Fi virtually all the time and really didn't use a cell phone because Wi-Fi, you can obviously make phone calls. WhatsApp, the messaging system works very well down here. Almost all the businesses uses WhatsApp. And also video conferencing, messaging, Facebook messaging, all of that sort of stuff. We have used that for video messaging, and like right now, right now I'm on a cell phone hotspot that's using a local SIM card from Antigua. The SIM card itself costs like $5 or $10, and the service is about $45 a month for 40 gigs. Now, 40 gigs is a fair amount. We can watch probably one movie a day, and certainly surf the internet, send emails, videos like this. 40 is a pretty good amount. If you need to go to work and you're doing a lot of work on that, maybe not. But 40 gigs for about $45 US is not too bad. And we can just do this on a monthly basis. There's no contract, and it's fairly quick. I mean, it's fair. The speeds are pretty good, as you can see. That's what it's on right now. And let me just see what we are. Okay, so the going back specifically, as I said, right now, what we're using is a local SIM cards. T-Mobile is a backup. And also Wi-Fi is a backup. It's still available down here. And we do have a Wi-Fi antenna. And because we're paying for 40 gigs, but in fact, yesterday we were over in Carlisle Bay, which is just around the corner from Falmouth Harbor, which we're there now. And we were there for 3 days. Well, we anchor in there, and the local resort has free Wi-Fi. So hey, for free Wi-Fi, I put the antenna up. We're about a quarter of a mile, half mile off the resort area, and unlimited Wi-Fi. And so we saved probably 4 or 5 gigs over the days. We can watch Netflix and all that sort of stuff. So that's how we use that, as really as a backup. And also you go ashore, most bars and things like that, restaurants have free Wi-Fi. So if you're in there, you'll see all the cruisers gearing up their cell phones and putting it on Wi-Fi to save the data. Of course, the data you're paying for. Wi-Fi, you're not, normally anyway. As far as, like I said, so Wi-Fi really, it does become a supplemental thing with, I mean, Wi-Fi is a supplemental to the cell service. Cell service is ubiquitous down here. It's very good. Everything is going cell. So, it's not really a problem. As far as an antenna for cell, I'll make a comment on that. As I said, we haven't needed it. We did buy that WeBoost. It didn't really work, and I think it's because of the system, and I didn't really get into it. But we, even going island to island, the islands, we're about 20 miles apart, generally speaking. And so, if you use a cell phone, well, you're in the island, and you have to remember all the development, all the settlements, all the towns are along the shoreline. So their cell phones are all along their antennas are along the shoreline. And actually, they're up on the mountains too. They're pretty high. So you can get a good cell without a booster on a regular cell phone. I would say 5 or 6 miles off, which is, if you're going up and down the island, that's basically all you're going to be off the islands. If you're going between islands, 20 miles, well, you got 5 miles, you're on one island, and then you got a 10-mile gap that you're not on cell phone, and then you got another 5 miles, and then you get on the next island. So for maybe a couple of hours, if you're sailing there, you're at a cell phone range, so it's not really a major thing. Now, I mentioned before, each island is different. So that was a problem when we had different SIMs for each island. There's a few ways around that. Is, like I said, T-Mobile does allow, and even AT&T, using that cell SIM card up and down the islands, up to a very, very limited time period, and then they will cut you off. And so you would have to watch that. However, the French islands, the French islands are Saint Martin, Guadeloupe, and Dominica, and Martinique. They're still part of France. Actually, they were owned by France, so they're under a different system. And the cell company there will sell a SIM card that's good for up and down the islands, and we've known people use that without buying a different SIM card in each island. The company, as not to mention, is Digicel. Digicel is up and down each island. You go to each island, they all Digicel, but each island, Digicel is operated independently as far as payments and things like that. But the French, if you get a French Digicel, it's actually good up and down all the islands, and it's about $50 a month, again, for about 50 gigs or something, and people who have it have really good luck with it. We were going to do that until the pandemic came along, and we were stuck in St. Lucia for 8 months. And then we've been in here in Antigua. We came from St. Lucia to Antigua, and we've been here for since November. Again, we're here this long period. It's best to get a local SIM card and use local SIM cards at that point. If you're going up and down the island, you have to look at it a little bit differently. But again, you use your SIM cards and your cell basically as your main communicator, and Wi-Fi definitely as a backup. I'll quickly go through the other, as I said, the ham radio, single sideband. I won't spend too much time on it. I'll let Scott talk about that. But I am a net controller on what they call a coconut telegraph. And it's old technology, and it might be really archaic, and not many boaters have less and less use for it or use it, and because it's kind of expensive to install and maintain. But it's once it's up, it's free, and we communicate up and down the islands every morning on a net, and that's one of the ways. Like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on that. And of course, there's local nets going back to the VHF. There's VHF nets here too. So that's how we communicate with everybody up and down on the islands. As far as getting weather and things like that, there's many free. Well, NOAA is the main one. If you can get internet, which is if you have your cell phone, you do, or even your Wi-Fi, you'll get weather reports and all the information through NOAA, which is free. You have private forecasters, people like Chris Parker, and other things. So that's all the information is here, and it's all over those two major ways of communicating. Sat phones. People say, well, how about sat phones? Well, we don't have a sat phone. They've been around. We don't know of anybody down here that uses sat phones while they're going up and down the islands. If you're going offshore, you're taking the run from BVIs back to the East Coast or across the Atlantic, or across the Pacific, certainly sat phones would have to be looked at. I have no information on that, and so I can't comment on that. Other than that, I know that, yeah, they're kind of probably expensive, and they're not as, certainly not as fast and as easy to use as a local SIM card or a local cell phone. But I think that may change, and certainly with the satellites that are going up and the SpaceX system and everything else, well, that changes. But that goes back to where I started, that 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the only way to call somebody was on a boat was to get on the VHF marine radio, marine operator on channel 21, I think, and get a patch through. Things a lot have changed. So that's about it right now. And like I said, just as a seat of the pants, as a person on the front line here, this is what we're doing, and it's working out very well as far as I could see, with the cell phones, with Wi-Fi, VHF, ham radio, And so that's about it. And so I guess we'll turn it over to Scott.
Thank you very much, Bill. Scott, we're ready for you. It's going to be a little bit longer presentation, but it doesn't make any difference. We don't have a time limit. And Bill, thank you very much. And it sounds like spaghetti down there for communications.
Yeah.
Hi, well, I'm Scott Berg, and I think I probably know a lot of you. I'm coming to you from the sailing vessel Chardonnay. It's a 60-foot catch, and we got COVIDed like a lot of folks did, and we chose to stay in a gated yacht club community while we got our shots and things like that. So I'm actually in downtown Washington, D.C., where I also operate Marine Coast Station KCQ, which is part of the Seven Seas Cruising Association High Frequency Offshore Network. Our flagship station is KPK, operated by Commodore Glenn Tuttle out of Punta Gorda, Florida. And I want to talk for a minute about high frequency radio and where it fits into what we call GDMSS. That's the Global Maritime System for Safety and Distress. And I represent recreational boaters on that Coast Guard task force, along with the United States Power Squadron that also represents recreational boaters. But I represent offshore boaters, and the GDMSS system involves a lot of parts. And we break it down into areas, how close you are to shore. If you're doing coastal sailing, that is, you're never more than 100 miles from shore. Then your VHF radio, your VHF DSC radio, that's your radio that has a little red button. That's your primary means of communication, both for the morning nets, who's got a dinghy to sail, who's doing cocktails on their boat, who found out that the farmer's market has fresh blueberries. These are all, by the way, every anecdote I share is a real one from my own experience. And my favorite VHF one is, my daughter's coming down, she's 8 months pregnant, and do we know if there's an OBGYN or a DUA or a midwife in the anchorage just in case? Which was my favorite question on the morning net in Georgetown in the Exumas. And those nets operate the way you would think they would. And VHF radio, very high frequency radio, has basically line of sight plus about 10%. So you can think 30 to 50 miles if you've got a sailboat, 10 to 20 miles on a motor yacht is about what your VHF range will be, unless you're talking to the Coast Guard or a yacht club station. The Capital Yacht Club, where I run my station, has an antenna 130 feet in the air, and we have about 100-mile range on our VHF. HF radio, which maritimers sometimes call SSB, single sideband's a type of AM transmission that they use, and HF is high frequency, often called shortwave, often called long range. And that's the next step. That is, as you move beyond the line of sight from shore, when you just can't pick up the microphone and call the Coast Guard, the long range radio has worldwide coverage. And it breaks into two groups. You have what we called ham radio, which is the amateur service, and the marine service. They use the same technology, they use the same operating modes, they use frequencies that are interleaved. That is, you're going to have a maritime frequency followed by an amateur, followed by a maritime, might be a military one in there, might be an aircraft one in there. And the different frequencies have different ranges of transmission, because unlike your very high frequency, your VHF, which is the line of sight, the HF radio actually will bounce up and down off of the ionosphere and allow you to actually talk around the globe. That is, it doesn't just go right through the sky. It could actually bounce up and come back down. When I first started cruising back in the late 60s and early 70s, HF radio was the only way you had to talk to anybody once you were out of sight. And what I tell people is the fact that, contrary to what a lot of folks think, it's also one of the most reliable means of communication. And in an emergency, it is the important means of emergency communication. Because here's a little secret. Every ship in the world, more than 300 gross tons, and that's all of them, have an HF radio on board listening for emergency communications. However, they're not listening for a voice call. They're listening for a DSC call. They're listening for that little red button on the front of your modern marine high frequency radio. And we'll take example of Bill. Bill has an ICOM M802. It's a ubiquitous radio. They're superbly well built. And you attach, just like you did with your VHF. I know you all did this. You've all wired your VHF radio to your GPS. so that when you turn it on, your lat long is right there. And if you push that red button, it's going to send a mayday from your, and if you haven't done it, it's Friday, and that's your job for tomorrow. Hook up the radio. If you can't figure it out, send me an email and I'll walk you through it. And your HF radio is exactly the same. You have that little red button. If you push that red button, what's going to happen? It's going to send a message out to every single boat within 100 miles to 3,000 miles. And they're going to pick up the radio and say, I have an emergency. How can I help? It's the most amazing system. And it works in parallel with your EPIRB, your sat phone, your SART transponder, et cetera. And that's not why I have HF radios on board. And actually, I may have owned about 30 radios. I only have 5 on board most of the time. But the 3 means of communication that matter for those of you who are cruising are talking to other cruisers, talking to shore stations, and then we get to digital, which I split between email and fax. Your HF radio is a great source of high frequency weather facts. When I first started cruising, I had a big Furuno thing on the wall with a paper and literally a stylus that cut the paper as it came down, and it printed out our weather charts, our synoptic charts, our 500 millibar, our forecasts. Now you can just take your iPad, set it next to your radio, turn the frequency, and it magically appears on your iPad. It's all free. And it gives you this, unlike the GRIBs that we all download, it gives us a synoptic chart that was actually prepared by a weather service, whether European, American, or both, where a meteorologist started drawing in the fronts and circling things and saying, watch the heck out. And the other thing we can do is we can send and receive email. And I've been sending and receiving email over both the ham and the marine frequencies for about 25 years. And in the same way, when you first, for those of us who have enough gray hair and like Lewis grew up in the computer industry, I've owned 5 computer companies over 45 years. We used to use an audio modem to connect our computer and send data over the telephone lines. And with almost identical but dramatically more sophisticated technology, we can now take our HF radio that we own, the same radio we use for emergency communications, for talking to the radio nets, for making telephone calls. I called my mom when I was 300 miles offshore on a trip. I got a hold of the Maritime Mobile Service Network, and I said, anybody here want to run a phone patch and call my mom and tell her, because she gets a kick out of talking to her kid when he's halfway across an ocean. And I had 3 people volunteer to run a phone patch, and we talked for about 5 minutes. It was really amazing. That same radio I hook up my modem to, and I send and receive email. If you want to do business email, use the marine frequencies. If you're a ham operator and you're just sending one to your mom saying, hey, if life is great and we'll be in Cape Breton in a few days, you can use the ham frequencies, which are free. But I'm here just basically to say that this technology is 100 years old. It's critical to military communications. It's critical to maritime communications. And every ship that you see out there has one of these radios. They have a VHF and an HF. And while they don't listen to the radio, you all know that when you said big ship, blah, 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 if you call them by name because you pick it up, or you push the DSC button and make a DSC call, they always answer. And they always answer on the HF, on the DSC also. It's really amazing technology. And I am more than happy to answer any questions here, or anytime I'll be speaking at the Annapolis Boat Show and at the GAM. And my disclaimer, of course, like Lewis, yes, I do this for a living, and I'm not necessarily asking to do yours. Thank you very much.
Hey, Scott, thank you very, very much. We have some questions, and I also have Charles Stark, who's raised his hand, and since I can't tell what he would like, I'm sure he has questions, I'm going to set him up and allow him to talk. But the questions that we have some nice questions, and I think one of them probably will be more on the Lewis side. Has anyone had experience using Roku for creating a Wi-Fi hotspot while cruising? Pre-installed SIM card supposedly can be used in 38 countries. I have no experience with that. Lewis, do you know anything about that one?
I don't know about that particular router, but what I do know is about these world SIMs, and typically the world SIMs work everywhere, but they have limitations on speed, amount of data, and the price is usually quite high. I mean, typically $20 or $30 a gigabyte. So it gets to be quite expensive to use those. It's a lot less expensive to buy a regional SIM or a local SIM. And so my question would be, can you use a local SIM in that device? And what frequencies does it support? Does it support frequencies in the cruising zones that you plan to be in. As you saw, there's 2 different world systems. And so you want to make sure that that device works everywhere. If it's an open device, then I would say, well, yeah, sure, go for it. And then use that world SIM to get you to where you're going, and then shop around and buy a local SIM and then swap out that SIM card while you're in that region. Because again, typically what I have found in my experience is that those world SIM cards are quite expensive.
Thank you, Louis. I use that one SIM card just to get somewhere so I don't have to run in and get to customs or something, but then I go and get a SIM card. Bill, you were raising your hand there.
No, I wasn't. I'm sorry.
Okay. And Charles Stark, I invited him in. He asked what your visible group was, Louis.
Oh, yes. Okay. So that's in the slide. That's in the slide presentation, and I did paste it in the question and answer thing. So I'm not sure if it showed up there or not.
Yes, I got the link. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and so
thanks very much for your contact about the cell and so forth through Milt.
Yeah, sure. Great. Well, just the thing that on the visible plan is amazing. And it really seems like a too good to be true thing. I've been using it, you know, it's just a single thing for about a year at the $40 a month. And I thought it was a great deal at $40 a month. But if you go to the website, it's pretty, what you need to do is you need to actually go through the process of like buying a SIM card. And then that will walk you through creating an account. And once you've created that account and you've checked out and you've bought the service, then you can go back and click on that link that I've got there to join the group. And basically their policy is, if you've got 4 people in a group, 4 or more people in a group, it's $25 a month for unlimited voice, unlimited text, unlimited and unlimited data, and then unlimited tethering. But the tethering is throttled at 5 megabits, and only one device can be tethered. So anyway, I invite you guys to join. I mean, each account is independent. It's not like a family plan. So you have your own billing, your own web login, and everything else, and you're just a member of this group to get the discount. So I'm not sure how that makes business sense to them, but you know, hey, $25 is $25.
Thank you, Louis. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
And thank you for that question, Charles. Then Lisa Goodwin asked, do you need the industrial router or can you use a basic router? And I know you've been doing a lot of work on routers, Louis. You know,
yeah. I mean, I live and breathe routers. I mean, I make them. You know, there's a million things that you can do to configure them. Certainly all of our routers have firewalls in them. I can't do a direct comparison with the PepWave device.
Connected to VSKTOP CDLLGM9.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that was. Yeah, but right. But I think that any high quality router should be able to give you the tools that you need to basically block yourself. The big thing is that you really don't want to use any open Wi-Fi. Any Wi-Fi's that are open are unencrypted, and so you want to keep that in mind.
thank you for that, Louis. And also, any of those routers, there's a whole bunch of different settings most of us aren't familiar with, as Don mentioned in his discussions. So a little bit of research or figuring out what some of those settings are. Don't just do what a lot of folks do and say, oh, I'm not going to do that. I mean, yeah, you got to figure out what the settings are. You talk to the vendor, for goodness sakes, figure out what the safest thing is for what you want to do.
You know, there's two reasons to learn how to use a firewall, and you can use a firewall on the router, or you can use a firewall on your computer. And there's 2 reasons. One of them is security, and that's certainly important. But from a practical standpoint, you know, we're paying for data. You've got allocation limits, and it's costing you dollars per gigabyte to use these things. And so you want to prevent things like your Windows updates from doing updates, and you want to prevent, you know, just chats from applications that are running in the background from doing things, and automatic updates from being applied and so forth, because they just eat up bandwidth. And so it's a good idea. I use I have a Mac here, and I use a tool called Little Snitch, which is absolutely fantastic because you can turn it on, and every time something wants to access the internet, it asks you, and you can see what is actually talking in the internet, and you can see how much bandwidth each process is using. And so that really allows you to limit the amount of traffic that is going over your internet connection.
Ha. I knew the dogs were doing something they weren't supposed to do. So anyway, Louis, thank you very much. Does anyone else have any questions?
I actually have a question for Louis.
Okay.
And this comes from a lot of my clients. Most of these routers, and maybe Don, I'm more of a hardware guy than a software guy, but I don't know this one for these particular products. When you have a router, whether it's the ones that are Don recommended, a Glow, whatever else is out there, and they're all come with a little 12-volt wall wart. Now, some electronics can easily run on a wide range of voltages, other ones can't. And we have to put in a DC-DC voltage regulator so that when it hits 14 or 15 volts on a charge cycle, we're not going to burn it out. Are you guys familiar with how most of the marine ones handle that specific? We'll use the Glow as an example for Louis and the ones that Don recommended. Can you guys sort of talk about whether we could cut that ward off and hook it up to a fuse in a 12-volt system, or do the systems you're familiar with really require a regulated 12 volts?
So I will say that for anything that I have designed, you can go from 9 volts up to 35 volts, and all of my new routers are 9 volts to 60 volts. And absolutely, you can just cut the pigtail off of that and just wire it straight into your house. It doesn't matter what it is.
Okay. And believe it or not, that's a question I get almost every month.
Yeah.
Don, what you get some experience, Don? You're muted.
I haven't put it on the boat yet, but I'm going to call the company tomorrow and buy the router for the boat. And again, you saw in my stats, there's a range. So I haven't had the experience yet, but I was going to ask the question since you brought it up with the guys that sell them. And from what Louis is saying, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you would think so. And everything I've certainly worked on, I go out of my way, especially the 120, 240 stuff. We always tried to make it 50, 60 hertz, it's 90 to 260 volts, because it's a whole lot easier to design the power supply that way than have to make another one if you open a new market.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that, for most, I mean, I would just take a look at the wall wart and see what the voltage is. And if it's, within the 12 volt range, you're probably okay to hook it up with the house. One thing to keep in mind is that this is not an issue for most of us because we have our house battery separate from our start battery. But if you've got it connected to an ignition circuit, those voltages can spike well over 60 volts. And so you can fry the unit when you start your engine. So just make sure that you're keeping within a few volts from that 12 volt spec.
And for those that are curious, the point that he's making is the starter motor throws a spike when the starter motor turns the engine. The minute that begins to wind down, that throws a spike back. If your starter battery is large enough, you won't notice it. But if you've got, like most boats do with a single starter battery, you'll see a few milliseconds of high spike. And we've there are ways to deal with that. Our answer to almost everyone is to wire their electronics directly to a separate panel that comes directly off your house bank, or if you've got a bigger boat like I do, directly off of a dedicated electronics bank. I run all my radios and electronics off a dedicated bank of 4 golf cart gel cells that are completely isolated from everything else. For that and several other reasons.
So getting back to your thing, I'm concerned about the commercial products like PepWave and so forth, which are designed for businesses. Although they may be capable of doing 12 volts, you really need to be careful because they're definitely not going to be able to manage with the spikes or with the reverse polarity situation.
It's interesting though, Louis, these are for fleet trucks too.
Yeah, well, they're for fleet trucks, and you're probably fine because fleet trucks, I mean, they only have one battery usually, and that's the starter battery. Yeah. So you're usually okay.
Great question, but if they're going to be putting them in fleets of trucks, that's what that GPS antenna is for.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I asked the question because I have a friend who blew out an Amazon Alexa. He just cut it off. It said 12 volts. And of course, his alternator's running is right about 14.8 when the batteries are fully charged. Burned it out. And I said, for $15, I can sell you a DC to DC regulated power supply that's basically 9 to 15 in, 12 out. And that's what we're hooking up. And I didn't think I'd need one, but I wanted to raise the issue.
One thing I would like to raise, and Scott, you may be an expert on this, or maybe Lewis is, isn't there this new fancy broadband around the world thing, Star something or other?
Okay,
that
Starlink. I'll
Starlink.
start with Starlink, and I'll let Lewis pick it up. Starlink is Tesla / Musk's last thing. It's on an expensive. I have 2 friends that are testing it right now. The challenge with Starlink's current design, which is a low Earth satellite design, is that tracking is difficult. It's hard to do this kind of tracking with a small passive antenna. And some of the, well, it works fine in your house, the antenna that's not moving. And right now they ask you what your lat long is, and you can't take it more than about 10 miles from your house. I don't know that they have any plans for a marketable tracking antenna that would provide the same kind of tracking that we see with Inmarsat. Lewis, what's your experience?
So if you take a look at Iridium, for example, which is a LEO, a low orbit satellite system, similar, and you take a look at their Cirrus system, that's a nice high bandwidth 700 kbps system, solid state antenna that works fine. So so I'm pretty sure that they can address those issues. The bigger concern is cross-linking. Now, if you take a look at a satellite, it's only 900 kilometers above the surface, and so the footprint is very small. Mm-hmm. So you're transmitting your signal to the satellite. The satellite has to get that back down to an Earth station. Originally, in the first generation of this system, it was a single bounce thing. So you had to have a station near the satellite in order to be able to receive the internet connection. I hear now that they've got cross-linking working, but cross-linking is amazingly complex. And as you can imagine, if you've got a bunch of ships in the middle of the ocean that are cross-linking to just one or few satellites that are coastal, then your bandwidth is going to get impacted. And so your latency is going to go up, your bandwidth, your speed is going to go down, you're going to have congestion issues, and you're going to have latency issues. And I think that those are a bigger concern for them that they need to address. That has been Iridium's bread and butter all these years. And so we'll see, but the promise is wonderful. And Elon has said he's going to do this. And so let's just see if he's able to.
The promise is great, but I will say the fact that, I mean, I was in on Iridium at day one. I was actually working at DARPA for a while there. Mm-hmm. And my experience is the fact that the vast majority of these systems massively overpromise what they'll have in bandwidth and latency, and they fall down there. And I have a lot of friends who think that they're a year away from getting a Starlink and put in their boat and watch streaming movies across the Atlantic. And I try to explain that's not exactly how this is going to work. But I'll certainly take anything that works.
Yeah, I'm going to guess that also the price. They haven't announced any pricing, and I'm going to guess that the pricing is probably going to be a little more expensive for the maritime. So they said they uniform pricing, but
it can't. The numbers don't work with uniform pricing.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll see. I want one on my boat, so we'll see.
The boat I used to drive had an Inmarsat. It was pretty wonderful, but I wasn't paying the bill.
Right. I took mine off when I sold the company. So.
Yeah, somebody else had to pay for those 24-inch domes. Somebody had to pay for those.
Well, thank you guys very much. And I see Tony Salvia there. He's my kind of partner in crime, so to speak, with webinars. He has SailFlix, and very experienced in high bandwidth use of the internet, let me tell you. Thank you very much, Tori, for joining us. Lewis, as always, a pleasure. Don, wonderful presentation, a lot of things to think about. Bill, I hope you're enjoying the sun and everything down in Antigua. I'm somewhat jealous. No, I'm a lot jealous. And then Scott, you and I are sharing the weather together. We can both be jealous about Bill. But then, Bill, where are you going to end up? Are you going to end up going south?
Yes, we're the end of the month. We're going to St. Lucia, and we'll probably be there again because Trinidad is not open.
Yep. Well, thank you very much, and we will see everyone. There's more webinars coming up. One for April 21st, one for April 28th on sales. May 6th will be Chesapeake Bay Meander, talking about different places in the Chesapeake Bay with Ed Tillett. And then we have June 4th, I'm going to be doing a webinar down into the Caribbean with Trinidad, Colombia, Panama, asking about what's going on there as boats try to figure out what they're going to be doing for hurricane season. But thank you all very much, and I enjoyed this. We will be posting the recordings. We'll be sending out links to that and the slides and presentations. I see we have 2 people came in. Yes. Okay, the Davises have one question. I think I will ask Louis this one, and then this will be the last question. Do any panel members have experience with Wi-Fi in metal boats, and can they add any pointers? We had to find an optimal spot for a router on our steel hull vessel. If you step outside, even though you're less than 2 foot away from the router, the network won't even show up as Wi-Fi doesn't pass through metal objects. It's nice for security, but means you can't stroll around outside while surfing. Any thoughts?
So my thought is, so I designed something called a Glow, which is an Iridium Go kind of device inside of a dome, and that has Wi-Fi outside, and then it's connected to a router down below, which has Wi-Fi inside. So basically you have a single Wi-Fi SSID, but you've got signal that is being broadcast outside and signal being broadcast inside. That was designed that way for workboats that are made out of metal. And so I think that the only way to really solve this problem is to actually have a situation where you've got 2 transmitters, one outside and one inside. And that's a product that would solve your problem, and something to consider.
Well, I was going to pop in and recommend his product so he didn't have to. I've done a lot of work on steel boats, and you've got 2 choices. You can buy the Glow, which is an all-in-one phenomenal tool, or you can do what we do, which is use 2 powered over internet devices, one which is the global receiver that brings in the signal, and then a second transmitter above deck, another transmitter below deck. The advantage of what we did was it allowed us to have a firewalled off public, so I could rebroadcast my internet signal to the entire anchorage, whether it was coming off my customers. We were big aluminum yachts, obviously, but whether it's coming off my customers' Inmarsat or off a cell link, we had the ability to say the outside network was a publicly accessible network. And I think that the Glow is the right answer. I actually have a client on this call that I'm recommending one for exactly this reason.
I do have one more question. I said I wouldn't have any more. Louis, what routers have you designed? We had that question from Lisa.
So I did all of the Redport routers. So if you go redportglobal.com, everything that you see there, I designed. Now, I have to say that I'm no longer associated with that company because I sold it 3 years ago, but the products that are still there are ones that I designed. I have new products that are being manufactured with my new company, which I just formed last week. And so one of them I will mention here is a nifty little device, which is quite inexpensive, that works with Predict Wind. And so this is a little router that basically you tether to your phone or to your local network. And what it does is it has a built-in GPS. It has an N2K interface, or it can get an NMEA 183 interface, and it collects data from your boat. And then when it has access to the internet, it transmits that to Predict Wind so that it can go onto the Predict Wind tracking page. And that way you can use the tracking service. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it or not, but it's a very nice tracking service with a blogging thing associated with it, without requiring a satellite phone. And so you can go offshore, you can go anywhere you want to. The device records those position reports, stores them locally. And then when you have an internet connection through your cell phone or through your whatever device you're using, through your Wi-Fi amplification system or whatever, then it'll upload all those position reports and put them on your website so that your friends and family can track all of that stuff. And so that's a product that I'm working on right now. And so more will come. But to answer your question, like I say, if you go to redportglobal.com, anything you see there was something that I designed.
Thank you very much, Louis. You were telling me about that new little router, and I thought that was very interesting. We'll listen more about it, and we'll read your slides and learn more about how visible might save some money for a lot of folks. Thank you all very much. Scott, is always a pleasure. Tori, Don, Louis, Bill, and Charles.